One of my most powerful memories as a child was a road trip that my parents took me and my siblings on when I was 11 years old. We lived in Uruguay back then, and if I'm being totally honest, I can't remember where we even went on this road trip. I just recalled that we, 6 of us children back then, we were 6, and my parents, that we were in a car together for hours and hours and hours. And my parents decided that instead of us bickering in the backseat and playing games, that we were actually going to have some family activities. The first activity was to create a family mission statement. So my parents asked us to really think about who we are as a family, who we want to be. How are we going to have a home in which we live up to certain ideas and ideals? And it was incredibly powerful. The second activity that my parents had us do, tied to this mission statement, was as follows. They decided that we were actually going to go around the car, 8 individuals in one car, and that all of us were going to talk about the strength in the different members of our family. What do I mean by that? If it was my father's turn to go first, each person in our family was going to get to go and to express what they saw in him, the strength, the talents, the things that they admired. And we were going to do that for every member of the family as a way to help us realize who we each are as we try to live up to this mission statement. Now, I really don't remember much about the actual road trip, but I remember sitting there in the car and I was eagerly awaiting my turn. When is it going to be my turn? When different members of my family are going to speak about me? And as you can imagine, 11-year-old me, I was already rehearsing and thinking, what talent are they going to pick up on? What strength are they going to highlight? And I was especially nervous for my mom to speak about me because moms, they tend to know us best. And in my mind, I began to imagine what she might highlight. And when it was my mom's turn, I remember that I was really taken aback because I had assumed that she was going to highlight some of the things that I was, known for as an 11-year-old. I was known for being really good at school. I was known for being a leader and taking on different positions in my class. And these were the things that I was sure that she was going to highlight. But my mom didn't say any of that. Instead, and she wasn't even looking at me because she was in the front seat, but I remember her saying that what she admired about me, what she wanted to highlight right then in that family road trip, was that I was a kind person, that I could be considerate of others, that I could give to people who needed help. And I remember being so taken aback at that moment. My first reaction, if I'm being honest, and we should be honest, my first reaction was disappointment. What is this? What is she talking about? There's all these other things that I have been rewarded for in my class, amongst my friends. Why is my mom choosing these things that are not the attributes that I tend to think of myself and the things that I like about myself? That was my first reaction. But my second reaction was actually a sense of disorientation. I was like, wait a second. If the woman, the person that knows me the most in the world and that loves me the most in the world and that I love the most in the world, if she thinks that there is kindness in me, that I can be known as this, as one of my attributes they are going to highlight, then maybe this is something that I can be known for. Then maybe this is something that I can strive for. Now, I was only 11 years old, but I can honestly say that that was a turning point in my life. From that moment on, I started thinking of myself not only through the attributes that I was told in my class and amongst my friends, but also I had this challenge that I began thinking about. If my mom sees this potential in me, what can I do to actually become that person? And I have thought so much about this moment, and I've even asked myself, what was so powerful about that moment? And I think that encounter with my mom, that conversation, that was a gift that many of us in our life experience. And the gift is when you interact with someone who helps you see yourself in a different, more expansive way, who helps you recognize in yourself potentialities and abilities that you never thought that you might have. I have been thinking a lot about this, not only as a human being in this world, but also as a parent myself. I have my children, and part of what I think is my parenting responsibility is not only to raise them to become good people, good citizens, good Jews, but actually to help them understand that who they might think they are is not the end all of who they can become. That part of what it means to be a human being in this world is to take seriously the fact that we get to shape who we become. That we are, perhaps using more, business-like language, that we are the most important product that we are going to get to work on throughout our lives, and that we have agency in shaping who we want to become. I think this is not only something I learned from my mom, but in terms of the Jewish tradition that we've inherited, so much of our tradition emphasizes this to us, that we get to shape who we become. I want to learn right now a couple of Mishnayot from Pirkei Avot, from the ethic of our fathers. And I want to look at two of them from the 5th chapter and kind of examine how they might help us think in this way. And before we go into the text, I do want to argue that part of what we learn from this Mishnayot is deeply countercultural, that we are receiving messages here that might actually go against the grain of what our society is telling us right now about who we are and who we get to be. So let me start with the following Mishnah I'm going to read right now. I'll read in Hebrew and in English. This is the 15th Mishnah in chapter 5 in Pirkei Avot. Arba'a midot badeot. We are told there are 4 different kinds of temperaments or 4 different kinds of attitudes in which people might live their lives. Noach lichos v'noach lirtzot. The first one is one who is easily angered and easily pacified. So you might imagine a person here who has a very quick trigger. It's somebody who is very easily affected by the world around them. So this person will get angry very quickly, but also they're going to be appeased. They can forgive very quickly as well. The Mishnah tells us, Yatsa efsedo bischaro. This person, it's not good to be angry very quickly. So it's kind of like a loss. But this loss, this not great thing about character, almost gets cancelled out by being very quickly appeased. So that's the first kind of type of temperament. The second one, קשה לכעוס וקשה לרצות, יצא שכרו בהפסדו. Somebody who's hard to anger and hard to pacify. This person's gain is cancelled by their loss. So this is somebody who, again, not as easily affected by their outside environment, doesn't get angry so easily, but also once they're angry, the same thing works out in the other way. They don't get appeased that easily either. There's something almost rigid there. And the Mishnah tells us this also gets cancelled out. Even though it's good that this person is not quick to anger, right? They're hard to anger, but it's not great that they're also hard to be appeased. There's 2 more attitudes that are describing this Mishnah. One is קשה לכעוס ונוח לרצות. Somebody who is hard to anger, but easy to pacify. This is a chassid, a pious person. This, the Mishnah tells us, is the best of all worlds. You are basically very hard to anger. You're not that easily affected, but you are very quickly to be appeased. You're easily affected when it comes to forgiving, to be more flexible towards other. This is the ideal according to this Mishnah. And the fourth, noach lichos v'kashe lirtzot rasha, somebody who is easily angered and hard to pacify, is somebody who is wicked, which in this case, I would say it's the least good option in these 4 kind of temperaments. Now, we can look at this Mishnah, and we can, at the first reading, we can read this and say, we are being told there's 4 kinds of ways in which we might react to anger, to being pacified, and there's some that are better than others. But I actually just want to tease out something very important here that might not be obvious. Part of what the Mishnah is suggesting here by giving these 4 different categories, it's actually suggesting that we as human beings get to do avodat amidot, that we get to actually work on our character traits. What do I mean by that? The Mishnah is telling us it's not that your DNA or your upbringing determines who you are in this world in terms of your attributes. You actually get to work on your attributes and your personality. How do we see this? We see this because the chassid, the pious, the best option, as seen in this Mishnah, is literally somebody whose character traits are being worked on. Because think about the following. If you're somebody who's quick to react to everything, then you're the first category. You're quick to anger, you're quick to forgive. If you're somebody who's like slow to be moved, you're slow to be moved both to anger and to forgiveness. The Mishnah is telling us you can actually work to go a little bit against the grain. You can decide when it comes to anger, I'm going to work really hard on myself to not be so triggered so quickly, to not be affected so quickly. But when it comes to forgiveness, I'm going to almost like work on the opposite direction and allow myself to be affected even more. The way the Mishnah described these four kind of temperaments, kind of midot that we can choose are not just personalities that are born or that are shaped by environments. They are personalities that we get to work on. When I read this Mishnah, I thought not only of my mom and of her basically suggesting you can become the following person if you think of yourself in this way, but I also thought about Benjamin Franklin. Now, we might think of Benjamin Franklin mainly as a founding father, as somebody who was a diplomat, who was really into innovation, who created so many things. But one thing that we don't realize so much about Benjamin Franklin is that he was also somebody who believed deeply that we get to work on ourselves, that we get to shape who we are. Now, before I read one of his quotes, I just want to emphasize again how countercultural this is. We live in an American and Western society in which we are often taught that we are just okay the way we are and that we are born a certain way or that we are shaped by our environment a certain way. When we are being told that, we are not actually being offered an invitation to think, who do you want to be? How do you work on yourself, on your temperament to become a better person? Let me read the following quote by Benjamin Franklin. He wrote this in a work called The Art of Virtue, which was his formula for successful living. We stand at the crossroads, each minute, each hour, each day, making choices. We choose the thoughts we allow ourselves to think, the passions we allow ourselves to feel, and the actions we allow ourselves to perform. Each choice is made in the context of whatever value system we have selected to govern our lives. In selecting the value system, we are, in a very real way, making the most important choice we will ever make. This is incredibly important. This tells us, and Franklin, by the way, had 13 virtues that he decided to work on throughout his life and to journal and to actually look at himself. This is part of what is so important to remind ourselves and to insert within our parenting to our children, to remind our children that this avodat midot, this work on ourselves, who we are as human beings, it's available to all of us. And that sometimes the stumbling block that we might have in front of us is that we don't think of ourselves as people who can be slow to anger and quick to forgive. And so we might actually need that reminder to be told, you can work on yourself. And that is a gift because after, God willing, 120 years, we are the products that we create in this world. I want to look at one more Mishnah that I think really conveys this in a powerful way. And it's a pretty famous Mishnah. And it's a Mishnah, Mishnah number 21 in this 5th chapter, that talks about what it means to have machloket, disagreement, dispute. And the Mishnah says the following, Kol machloket she'i l'shem shamayim, sofa leitkayem. Any dispute that is for the sake of heaven will have enduring value. V'she'ena l'shem shamayim en sofa leitkayem. And that dispute which is not for the sake of heaven will not have enduring value. Just to summarize, this just basically means that Jewish tradition says dispute can actually be good. If it's for the sake of heaven with the right intention, then disagreement, different points of view can actually have tremendous value. If it's not for the sake of heaven, it will not have lasting value and it is not good. And then the Mishnah gives us an example. It says, איזו היא מחלוקת שהיא לשם שמיים, which is a dispute for the sake of heaven. That is the מחלוקת, the dispute between Hillel and Shammai. These are two sages from the time of the Mishnah, and it's two sages who end up really representing almost like two schools of thought when it comes to not just legal approaches, but different kind of scholarly thought within Judaism. ושאינה לשם שמיים, and what is an example of a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven? שזאת מחלוקת קורח וכל עדתו. That is a dispute of Korach and all his company. And here the Mishnah is referring to the rebellion that basically Korach leads in the book of Numbers against Moses. Now, whenever I have read and learned this Mishnah, very often it's been used to talk about disagreements and pluralism and the limits of dispute and how can we disagree with each other within a covenant or within a community. But when I actually looked at it again in light of the previous Mishnah that we just learned together and just thinking about this topic of self-improvement, I realized the following. And I'm saying this especially as a mother. There's a lot of stories that are taught to children about Hillel and Shammai. Okay, these two sages. And Hillel, in the books that my children have, Hillel is this like friendlier, kind of like more compassionate, more capacious kind of sage. That's the way that he's been depicted throughout Jewish history. And Shammai is depicted as a more rigid, a little bit stricter, right, kind of scholar and school of thought. And what I realized something is the following, that sometimes what holds us back from self-improvement is not only the conception that we have about who we are in this world, but sometimes we might think, oh, I need to have that personality to be a great sage or a great contributor to my Jewish community. I need to be a certain person to be that. And by basically saying we have Hillel and we have Shammai, and they are very different from each other, and they represent not only two different legal schools of thoughts, but even two different personalities. What is the Mishnah telling us? It's telling us all of us, no matter who we are, no matter our personalities, no matter our traits, all of us can become great. All of us can improve, and we can do so. Let me just be a little bit more sharp here. We can do so in a way that doesn't lead all of us to be the same. We are not looking for monolithic, right, copies of the same person in the world. We want to have machloket. What machloket means is that we get to serve God and our communities, bringing our individuality with us. As long as we take our individuality and we improve upon it, and we do it l'shem shamayim for the sake of heaven, then we can have great communities and we can really help each other. So I really think that learning Mishnayot right now for us and for our children, it is so important because we get to remind ourselves that part of our work is to look at who we are and to remember that we get to improve ourselves. We get to become even better. We get to bring in our individual dispositions and serve God. So I hope that all of us take seriously the fact that we are chains in this link of tradition and that we get to take this Mishnayot. And just like my mother had that moment with me in which she helped me see myself differently with new potentials of who I could become, that we get to give this gift to our own children, learn Mishnayot with them, learn Pirkei Avot with them, and help them realize how much potentiality they have within themselves to become even better and to serve our people.